Ladies and gentlemen, Liz Brunner.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Find that confidence even if you don't feel it on the inside. Walk with confidence. Hold your head up high. Smile. Make eye contact. That projects confidence. And guess what? That energy that you're putting out there, it's going to be returned back to you.
I have to tell you, what a rock star guest speaker. She had this room engaged, inspired. Failure is not the enemy. Not learning the lessons is the enemy.
What I really loved about Liz's message today was to always be thinking about what's next.
The presence that you bring to whatever role you have, how you show up, how you communicate, how you act, how you listen, it all has an impact on how you are seen and heard.
Love the fact that you shouldn't be afraid to fail. You should be afraid to not learn.
I have Liz's 4 C's: confidence, content, clarity, and conversational.
I'm so moved and empowered by Liz's presentation. She brought me to tears.
Your actions speak louder than your words. It's not about whether people like you or not. It's can you do the right things at the right time. What you model to your teams is how they're going to model to other people.
Just had a great presentation by Liz Brunner. Very inspirational.
We are the writers, producers, and directors of our own life. And that life begins at the end of our comfort zone. Live the life that you have imagined and start imagining your next chapter.
Welcome to E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy, a podcast brought to you by the Empathy Collective, a consulting firm that helps business leaders inspire change, one conversation at a time. We are building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. Whether you are a blue-collar worker or white-collar worker, small business owner or corporate executive, you belong in this community. Oprah once said, "That whisper you keep hearing is the universe trying to get your attention." My guest today, Liz Brunner, listened to every whisper and took them to heart. As a result, her life journey took her from high school music teacher to television news anchor to executive coach, author, and keynote speaker. The whispers guided her down a path where she could use her voice to entertain, educate, coach, and inspire. We will talk about Liz's journey of intentional transformation and how you too can respond to those whispers with curiosity and confidence. This is E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy. Welcome to the show, Liz. It is such a delight to have you here. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. You've had such an interesting career path, and we'll be talking a lot about that today.
Thanks so much for having me, Rebecca. I'm delighted to be with you today.
I thought it was funny. Last time we talked, you actually brought up one of Oprah's famous quotes about the whispers, right? That whisper you keep hearing is the universe trying to get your attention. And I personally always listen to whispers. I find them fascinating. And I feel like when I meet other people who do the same, I'm equally intrigued. And I feel like your whole life story is all about you listening to those whispers, listening with curiosity and leaning into it. And it really transformed you into what you call Liz 4.0. So can you talk about what that journey looked like and what does listening to those whispers actually look like? And how did it carry you to this 4.0 version of yourself?
Well, first of all, it's not always easy to listen to the whispers and then take action. And I'm not going to say that I always listened and went, okay, we're going to go down this path, because that's life. We don't always listen. But the whispers keep coming. And at first they might be that whisper, and then they might be a little bit louder, and then they might eventually be a roar, or as Oprah has said, sometimes it might hit you over the head like a frying pan. And so I think when the universe is trying to get your attention about something, they will continue to do so until you follow suit. And it may take a lot longer if you don't listen to get to your destiny. It may take a lot longer because you haven't listened. I'm grateful that I feel like I have listened, even though perhaps the path was a little meandering. And when you talk about Liz 4.0, yes, I started out as a high school music teacher, singing semi-professionally and traveling Europe with a performance group. I have a degree in vocal performance and music education. Now, you wouldn't think that that would lend itself to a lot of great opportunities or potential to really make something and do something different in your life, but it actually has. I taught high school choral music in the Chicago area for a couple of years, and then I felt like there was something more I was supposed to do, that whisper. I didn't know what it was. I had no clue what I wanted to do, but I did take a step back from teaching, and I worked in retail, had to pay the bills. Thankfully, I was successful at it, but that was only a couple of years. But during that period of time, I began to start sort of processing, well, what else could I do? Now, this is back before Google. So I was literally going to the library or mailing things in to get, various books and things like that. And so, assessment tests. And what I discovered was that besides thinking I wanted to do something in architecture, like be an architect or construction or interior design, I also had an interest in television simply because when I was Miss Illinois 1979 in the Miss America Scholarship Pageant, I had done one television commercial. Now, that whole pageant system paid for my education. I'm very proud of that because I paid for every penny of my education. My parents couldn't do it anyway, so I'm glad I could do it for myself. But because I had done that one commercial, I thought, I wonder if I could do something in television. And I was reading this wonderful book called Who's Hiring Who by Richard Lathrop, and he talked about informational interviews. Now, I don't know about you, Rebecca, but I had never heard of such a thing back then. But I bravely and blindly called up the 2 television stations in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, which is where I was living at the time, simply to ask, does what I think I want to do even exist? I thought it was PR. Do I need to go back to college and get another degree? What do I need to do to maybe even get into television? All right, fast forward. A position was literally created for me that didn't even exist after about 6 months of conversation. And Rebecca, I took that opportunity to learn as much as I could. That was my graduate school. And so I was at that first station for 3 years. Then I got called to a television station in Tampa, Florida. So that was another CBS affiliate. So I went from the 75th market to the 13th market. And I was in Tampa for 5 years. And then I came to Boston and was in television for 20 years at ABC. So all told, 28 years in television, and thankfully, successfully as an Emmy award-winning journalist. Now, again, I heard those whispers a couple of years before I ended up leaving television. I was like, oh my gosh, I just feel like there's even more that I'm supposed to be doing. Now, while I didn't have a clue before, what I did know this time around was that I had skills and experience that I had honed. I believed that I had gifts and talents that I'd been blessed with, and I knew that I wanted to be of service in some way to be able to share that with people. So I started talking with leaders in the community, which I hoped and thought were confidential, to say, what does somebody like me do? Back to those informational interviews. What does somebody like me do when you think maybe you want to do something else? And their answers were often very entertaining. One person said to me in particular, well, I see you read the news every night. Trust me, it's more than just reading the news. But I'd kind of narrowed it down to 3 different lanes, if you will. One could be some communications expert for a corporation, although I didn't know who. One could be maybe being an executive director for a nonprofit, although I'd never done that before. Or I could launch my business and I could teach people about presence and public speaking and presentation skills and storytelling and leadership. And oh yes, even media training too. And one of the mentors that I spoke with during those couple of years said, Liz, you're well known, you're well respected, you have credibility. That is value. Why would you give that value to somebody else? Launch a business. If in 6 months or 9 months you don't like it, you don't have any clients, you can always go do something else. Rebecca, in that moment, a kaleidoscope went click, and I made the decision, I'm going to launch a business. And I had never, ever wanted to do that. Ever. It was not on my radar screen. And here we are almost 12 years later. But the beauty of that is, and then I started working with wonderful clients all over the country and the world for that matter. And people will say to me, well, how did you do this and then go to this? I was able to connect the themes and patterns of my life. For example, as a high school music teacher singing semi-professionally, sharing stories through song and voice. As an anchor, I was sharing other people's stories using my voice. As an executive communications coach, I am helping other people learn how to tell their stories, to craft their stories, and how to use their voice well. So all that vocal training still comes into play. And now as a keynote speaker and an author, I'm sharing my story using my voice. When we can connect those themes and patterns that really help us pivot and go from one thing to the next, and you might think all these things are unrelated, but if you put yourself in the witness position, you can actually see, you know what? Some of these things are connected. That's the story in a nutshell.
It's such a fascinating story, and I just wonder, because obviously in retrospect it's so easy to see those connections, especially if you're naturally inclined to see that big picture, and not everyone is. But when you're in the moment, when you're at that pivotal moment where you started asking yourself, is there something else I could do, something more I could do? What was driving that gut intuition? Because I can't imagine you were naturally thinking, oh yeah, this connects really well to my vocal training at university. And you weren't connecting the dots in the moment, were you? What was happening in that moment?
Not at all. In fact, I didn't connect the dots until after I'd been in my business for about 5 or 6 years. And I just went, wait a minute, there is connection here. And in those moments, no, those are scary, scary moments. I'm not going to lie. I was petrified, especially when I launched my business, because I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I've never wanted to do this. I have no clue how to do this. Why am I doing this? Even when I got into television, I was scared to death because I thought, okay, I know that I can present myself, but I didn't know how I was going to do TV. And in fact, when they first asked me to do these announcements in the booth and do just my voice, I was like, today, I felt like I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And then they had me do my own show, and then they had me do the weather. Now, I had never done the weather either, but I'm telling you, the best training you could ever have for live TV, because there's no script. But I would watch the Weather Channel, and then I would go in and I'd read all the AP Wire copy. And I kept telling myself, Liz, just because you've never done something doesn't mean you can't. You just have to try. So when you ask, how do I maneuver all these whispers and these intuitions and everything, I'm not saying I wasn't scared. But I kept saying, Liz, you know more than you think you know. And we all know more than we think we know. And we have to learn how to trust that. You know, my grandmother, Dr. Dorothy Dunning-Chaco, used to say, no knowledge is ever wasted in the good Lord's sight. And that is so true, because no knowledge is ever wasted. Every experience we have, good and bad, teaches us something about ourselves, and we know more than we think we know. You left the corporate world. You know, how hard was that when you made that decision? You were listening to something that made you say, okay, I got to do this. Rebecca, this is your next step. I can't imagine you weren't afraid either.
100% afraid, yes.
Be afraid and do it anyway sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, but what would you recommend? I mean, for those who aren't as courageous, or, I mean, so step one, you have to hear the whisper. And some people aren't even tuned into that.
Yes.
So
people, if they hear something, they ignore it. I'm not going to, no, I can't do that. I can't do that.
So I guess first set of advice, how do you engage with the whisper to begin with? And then the second piece, once you're actually listening and curious, how do you then actually move forward and take the next step without freaking out?
Well, I'm not going to say you're not going to freak out, but I think that first piece is so important, which is that listening, because we hear the whispers maybe, and we may ignore them because we may say, maybe the limiting beliefs get stuck in our head. I've never done that. I can't do that. I'm too old. I'm not enough. I'm not this. I'm not that. Or imposter syndrome gets in the way as well. 70% of the population has imposter syndrome. So now, if the first step is to just say, there's somebody, someone, something is trying to tell me something. And then to take it to the next level, which is, it does take courage, it does take bravery, and being true to yourself. And I come back to, you know more than you think you know. When you're trying to make those pivots, you know, sometimes with my clients, and I'm helping them connect the dots of their own experiences, it's really helpful sometimes to have somebody else on the outside going, wait a minute, think about this, or think about that, or think about this, or think about that. Because we don't know how to connect those things because we've always done something one way. And so it does require a shift in mindset. First you listen, then it becomes a shift in mindset, and then you take those next steps. What can you do to move towards that direction? And you may not even know what that is. I didn't know what it was initially, and I just started asking questions and asking questions and asking questions. Be curious. I am so curious, and maybe that's just my journalism, but I think I was curious before I was a reporter. And I think that has a lot to do with it, is just being open to think outside the box and to trust that you know more than you think you know. And that's a hard thing to accept sometimes, but those are the places to begin. And then there's some concrete steps of informational interviews and who are your connections on LinkedIn? Who are your friends? Who are your family? Who's your community? Who can you go to that you trust to get advice about, should I go this way? Should I go that way? What do you think my skill set is? When I was talking to all these community leaders about my skill set, what I came to realize, Rebecca, was I had to learn to speak their language. For example, in television, we have a language. Breaking news might be similar to crisis management in the corporate world. Being a project manager in the corporate world is very much like being a producer or a reporter in television. And so because I was able to kind of make that connection, I was now able to express to people, well, here's, if they ask me, what do you think your skill set is? I would be able to say to them, well, this, and this, and this. But you have to be able to figure out, how do you do that? How can you speak their language if you speak a different language?
I never thought of that, but that's interesting. I mean, because you've made such dramatic pivots in just such different areas, you would have had to naturally learn the language of the next place in your path.
Yes, yes. And there is a language in almost any industry. And I'm not saying you have to know it by heart, but how can you connect the dots of what they do in their world and what you do in your world? One of the other things that I did, and this might be helpful for the listeners as well, is I would go on LinkedIn and I would put in, searching for jobs of what sort of things I thought I might be good at: communications, presentation skills, storytelling, leadership, and just to see what positions were open. Not that I was necessarily going to apply for anything, although that could have happened, but it didn't. But what it did do for me was to go, I like that. I like that. No, don't really want to ever do that. Oh God, never want to do that. And so I was trying to find ways to sort of narrow my focus of thinking of what might be next. So that when I went to that mentor and said, well, here are the 3 lanes that I think I can go down, he's like, wait a minute, Liz, start your business. And I did.
I love that. It's almost like you were doing your own journalistic research.
Yes.
For your career path.
I'm known for doing my research. Oh gosh. When I had my podcast, I would do so much research on my guests. I mean, I would read their books. I would listen to their podcasts. That's just my nature. I'm a curious person to begin with. But yeah, be curious. Open the box. Think outside the box. Don't be afraid to think outside the box.
And so I know you're working on a keynote called Intentional Transformation. Is that curiosity part of that intentional transformation? So how would you define intentional transformation?
Short answer is yes, it's a piece of it. I believe that we all have something that we can call the it factor. It is available to us. I'm sure you have seen, your listeners have seen, you're in a room and you see somebody walk in and you go, they've got something. They have presence or charisma or energy or something that you notice. Now, you may not be able to put a label on it, but you notice that. That's the it factor, it factor. And we can all have that through intentional transformation. Intentional transformation to me means you are aligning your physical, your mental, and your relational selves. Now, the physical is the foundation. The physical, we're always transmitting energy. We're always communicating something about ourselves, whether it's your nonverbal communication cues. Your eyes are closed. How are you walking? What's your posture? Are you discombobulated when you walk into a room? You're sending a message of who you are, that physical piece. The energy piece is also part of that, and that comes from movement. Energy is kinetic. guess what? Just as much as you're looking at someone and forming a perception of them, they are forming one of you. Human nature. Is this person a friend? This person a foe? Should I be worried? Can I be fine? So we're always sending out this energy. And now when you add in the physical movement of everything, that physical movement moves the energy. Now, the physical movement also, this whole thing connects to your brain. That's the bridge to your mental self. And the stories you tell yourself become your actions, whether it is a limiting belief, whether it's imposter syndrome, any self-doubt that you have can get stuck in your psyche. And what's interesting is research suggests there's something like 50,000 plus thoughts that run through our head every single day, and 95% of them are on repeat. So what are you telling yourself? Because those thoughts become your actions. That's the mental piece. This is your GPS, your internal GPS connected to your intuition and everything else. And your body, by the way, is also intuition if you're listening to it. Now, when you combine both the physical and the mental, and this is all intentional, we have a choice every single day, Rebecca, whether we're paying attention to both of those two things. Then it connects to the relational self, because the relationship we have with ourselves is the relationship we have with everybody else in the world, personal, professional. Do you know what your strengths are? Do you know what your weaknesses are? Are you living your core values? Are you being fully authentic? And when you combine all three of these things, your physical, mental, and relational self, I believe it leads to the it factor, which leads to more presence, more confidence, more authenticity, and all of that leads to more influence. So they're all connected. They're all connected. But start with the physical. That's the foundation.
I love the way you describe that process. It reminds me of an interview I had recently with a woman who was one of the first females in the US Naval Academy. And she's basically in semi-retirement now, but she was saying one time when, as a young woman in the Naval Academy, she said it was very anti-military, but she was always late. So like late to class, late whatever, like that was just her thing. And so she was running to a meeting or a class or something at one point, and one of the officers stopped her and said, "Stop running." That stuck with her ever since, because she realized the running creates a perception of panic around you. So going back to that physical piece, it's everything, every gesture, every action that you make with your body, it radiates out to the people around you and creates a perception of who you are and what you represent.
You're so right. And that, that rushing as she did perhaps led to the perception that she was discombobulated, that she wasn't prepared, that she didn't know where she was going, and people took her less seriously.
What the officer told her was, you want to look confident. It's all about calm confidence.
Yes.
And she wasn't showing that. Even if she was confident and she was just simply running because she was late, it wasn't perceived that way.
And that's what's so fascinating especially about this whole topic, but it's also what I coach people on so much, is 65% of what you communicate is nonverbal. That energy, that movement, that physical presence that you're putting out there. The other 35% is your verbal communication. And part of being connected to your relational self and then being able to connect to everybody else is having unbelievable communication skills. And how can you get that? Because it is so important to how you put your message together, how you share your message. Are you relatable? Are you connecting with people? And if you're not, why not? If there's a disconnect between your verbal and your nonverbal, you may be saying one thing, but it's being perceived as something else. Where's the disconnect? And so it's so important to bring all these pieces together. And that's why there's a choice: intentional transformation. You can only transform if you are intentional, if you're thoughtful about it, if you work at it. And I hate to say that. And even when it comes down to confidence, speaking of your naval friend there for a moment, confidence, it's debatable whether you're born with it or not. Different sides of the coin on research on all of that. But we all can agree on one thing. It is incredibly important to be seen as confident in order to be successful. And just because you learn skills, and it's something everybody can learn, and you have to practice it. You can practice confidence. Now, are you always, once you achieve some level of confidence, is it always going to stay there? No, it's like the weather. Some days it can go up and some days it can go down. I call it the barometer, the confidence barometer. But can you find a level where you're more consistent? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. But it is something you can continue to build and develop.
Well, and you were talking about the thoughts that go through our head every day and the self-talk, the dialogue. What are we telling ourselves? I can't help but think, because I've talked to many therapists and other experts in this area who always go back to the self-talk as this driving force of how you show up in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you just said your thoughts basically become your actions, because they really do. And there is science behind that.
Yes.
Have you experienced some time in your career where you've maybe gone through some episodes of pretty consistent negative self-talk? And if so, how did you get yourself out of that hole?
I wouldn't say that I had deep reservoirs of negative self-talk, but did I have imposter syndrome from time to time? Absolutely, yes. When I went from my first television station to my second television station, where I was the director of community relations, and I was the only female in upper management, I had no role models at the station. I felt like I didn't know what the heck I was doing, and they were going to find out soon enough that I did not know what I was doing. And I just chose to listen a lot and to learn. And so I was filled with a lot of self-doubt. Like, I'm going to learn how to do this. I don't know how. I'm going to try. Look, nobody's perfect at everything. I'm not perfect at everything. But sometimes being imperfect is more perfect because you're being your best authentic self. Let that sink in for just a moment. And, the other thing too is there have been times where I had my own limiting beliefs, such as I didn't think I was smart enough to run my own business. Thankfully, one of my mentors, when I was brave enough to say that to him, he goes, "Liz, you are smart. You'll figure it out." I'm like, somebody believed in me. So yes, absolutely. I've had my moments of doubt, thankfully not too deep, but I also think that's because I do have a faith. I do have a spiritual essence of myself that I believe in, and I believe that I have a purpose. So I do not know all the answers, 100% do not know all the answers to anything and everything. But what I do know is I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to learn. And just because I think I have quote unquote failed at something, it's not a failure unless you don't learn the lesson. When you learn the lesson of every experience you have, that, let's call it a negative experience, maybe the outcome wasn't what you had hoped it would be, there's always a lesson that can be learned. Can you carry that forward?
What was your biggest lesson that you learned?
Where do I begin? I think the biggest lesson is, again, coming back to what I shared with you earlier, which is no knowledge is ever wasted. To learn to trust yourself that you know more than you think you know, and you will figure it out. I think it's Marie Forleo who says, everything is figure-outable or something like that. And it's, and that's a hard thing because confidence plays into that, limiting beliefs play into that, imposter syndrome plays into that. And you have to really work at it. This is where it's a choice, Rebecca, whether or not you want to transform or not. Do you want to become the person who you are meant to be? That's what intentional transformation is about. That's what this framework is about. And whether it's from having been on the screen, on television, or on a stage, or working behind the scenes with top level executives, helping them find their it factor and their presence and confidence, I've learned through all of those experiences how to put all this together, this framework, and can teach people now how to have their own it factor. And you know what? I love to say this too. We sometimes don't think we're ready. Guess what? We are ready. We're more than ready. We're more than ready. We just have to find a way to believe it.
I can completely relate to that. I remember telling someone shortly after I got laid off that was some person I didn't really know very well who I'd met through networking. And he said, "Have you ever thought about consulting, Rebecca? It could be a really good gig for you." And at the time I told myself, no, I have 10 more years in corporate, maybe when I'm 50 years old. And here I am.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't think I was ready. And I think a lot of people feel that way. They tell themselves that. So it's the self-talk. It goes back to the self-talk. What is the dialogue you're telling yourself? I was telling myself, this is not my career path. I'm supposed to go back in corporate. So then you just that follows suit with action.
That's what
Yes.
you knew. That's what you've done. That's what you know. That's what you think you should continue to do. And one of the first questions you ask me is, what's the first thing people need to do when they feel themselves at that crossroad and act? Well, listen to the fact that, you know what? You might be more than ready. You are ready. You are more than ready. And I always tell people, I want you to want more. I want you to want more. It's okay to want more, because so many people get sort of on this treadmill of, oh my God, I've got too many responsibilities. I'm overwhelmed at work. I've got kids. I've got family. I've got this. If I make any changes right now, everything's going to fall apart. So I can't make a change. I can't do anything differently. It's the time when it's time to say, I'm ready. How do you, not necessarily what do you want to do every day, but how do you want to feel every day? Can you answer the question of, am I thriving, whether it's personal or professional, or am I just surviving, barely surviving? And those are very hard questions to answer, very hard questions to answer. And let's face it, change is hard. The older we get, it's harder. Nobody likes change because it's uncomfortable. But sometimes that's where the growth happens, in the discomfort.
Well, and I think your examples of sitting in the discomfort and just writing it out are such good ones.
I had a spiritual mentor who once said to me, learn to hold the tension, Liz. Learn to hold the tension. I'm like, I don't want to hold the tension. I want it to be easier.
This sucks. Can it be over now? Yeah.
Learn to hold the tension. And that's such a beautiful phrase.
I love that so much. Well, I mean, obviously this whole journey for you is seemed very intentional, especially looking back, but
at the time it didn't think it was.
Well, that's why I want to ask you, I mean, if you could go back and change any of the decisions you made throughout this journey of yours, would you change anything?
I would not. Now, that's not to say that I wouldn't have preferred some different outcomes to some of the decisions that I made. Okay. But I believe we get where we're supposed to be. And sometimes, okay, well, the universe is going, okay, so you want to go there first? All right, let's get you back around. But I wouldn't change it because of the lessons that I've learned along the way. I am who I am today because of where I have been, and because I was willing to step back, put myself in that witness position. And even though at the time it did not feel intentional, I now know it was. I now know it was, in hindsight. It's always 20/20, right? Hindsight's always 20.
Absolutely.
But I do know, I mean, at the time it didn't feel intentional, even though, yes, okay, so I'm not going to stay in television. I'm going to launch a business. That was an intentional decision. And I remember calling up my marketing team that I'd been kind of playing around with, here's my URL and here are some photos. I'm not going to do anything for another 6 months to a year. And I called them up that day and I said, remember when I said you had 6 months to a year? I said, you have 6 weeks. Because if I didn't do it in that moment, Rebecca, I would have lost my courage. So that was intentional. But I also like to say, I think I'm a calculated, intelligent risk taker. Okay. You've taken risks. You became a consultant when you're like, I'm not ready to do this. This is not what I want to do. You took that risk. And sometimes, and I've jumped out of airplanes. I went skydiving once. That's a risk. But what's funny to me is launching my business was scarier than jumping out of an airplane and going skydiving. At least when I went skydiving, I had a parachute, and launching my business, I'm pleased. Can I have a soft landing? Can I make this work? And here we are almost 12 years later. I mean, I don't know how that happened. Shocking.
That's incredible. And, I love what you were saying about how you wouldn't change any of your decisions, although you would have liked to change the outcome, or, you were always happy with the outcome. And I've talked to some people who've mentioned deliberately trying to disengage from the outcome. So when they're going through something, rather than attaching to the outcome and really having expectations on what the outcome is.
Mm.
They focus their intention on the act, the action, the process, rather than the final outcome, knowing very well that their idea of what could be on the other end now could evolve over time. And I think that also helps me. I've taken that advice to heart and trying not to focus so much on what I think the outcome should be, because
That's
then
hard,
you
but
often
yes.
set yourself up for disappointment.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And at the same time, I also still believe we can hope. We can have a hope for an outcome, but can we also trust that we're doing everything we can to move towards that outcome, and it still may not be the one that we want because we could or should maybe be going in another direction. And that's hard. That's very hard. And I know people who have had to make those tough decisions. You know, I remember when I was writing my book Dare to Own You, I was petrified of writing this book, and especially the night before it was published. I'm like, I'm really putting this out there into the world? And yet at the same time, because I was like, what is the expectation I'm going to have for this? And I just said to myself, Liz, your intention in writing this book was to show people they know more than they think they know, to show that there does take courage, but you can make those pivots to 4.0 in my case. And that if in some way it helps someone, gives them the courage to say, you know what, maybe I can do this too, then I've achieved my outcome. Then I've achieved my outcome. My whole goal for my life, personally and professionally, is it's a vision, I guess I have, to help people find insight and motivation and inspiration so that they're living their best life, whatever that definition is for them. Because it's your definition of best life and my definition of best life are probably different. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And we spend a lot of time comparing our lives to other people's lives, especially with social media there. I mean, we can just doom scroll through Instagram or Facebook or whatever and compare our lives to others. But I love the point you're making is that your best life is uniquely yours.
It's your journey. It's your journey. And it is a journey. It's not a destination. I know I didn't make that quote up, but it's a good one. It really is. And as long as you stay curious, as long as you stay open, as long as you're willing to think outside the box, I think you're going to get where you are meant to be. I do believe we all have purpose. We all have an opportunity to be of service in some way. We are all blessed with gifts and talents, and it's up to us to uncover, discover, unlock whatever they may be, and to share them in some way, because they will make a difference even to one person's life.
That's such a powerful message. And if you don't mind me sharing a personal
Please.
example, since we are on this podcast, I'll tell you the original intention of this podcast was to not only put the message out there about workplace empathy, but what I wanted to do with the podcast was to deliberately weed out future employers that did not align with my values, which was this podcast. This podcast represents my values. So I thought, if I'm putting this message out there while I'm interviewing for corporate roles, and if someone interviews me and they notice my podcast and they don't like it, then I don't want to work for them. So that was the original intent. And now it's transformed into, it was the foundation of my change readiness program. And now it's a huge part of my consulting business, which once again, when I launched this podcast, that thought had not even crossed my mind. The advice I would give to people out there who are sitting on the fence is try to stay open to the possibilities.
Yes.
Because to your point, everyone has unique talents and their own purpose. You may not see that immediately, but just start following or listening to those whispers, following that path that's calling you. And you just never know where it's going to take you. Just be open to where it takes you. Sometimes you just have to let it pull you a little bit.
Yes, you do sometimes. It's funny. I was just working with a woman the other day, and she has been in corporate America forever, in real estate in particular. And she said, I've been out of work for the last year, and I keep looking at all these jobs and in the same industry. And I said, have you considered something else? And I said, pie in the sky. If you had no holds bar, what would you envision doing? What would be fun? What would be exciting to you? He goes, well, I think I want to teach or consult people and help them in this business. And I said, so what are you going to do to move towards that? Let's talk about what that path might look like. Where could you go? What could you do? What steps could you take? And so we brainstormed a bunch of different things. And by the time we got done with our session, she's like, I'm so excited. I said, yes.
Mission accomplished.
Because even though she doesn't know exactly where it's going to go, now she has a path or a plan. And sometimes it does take working with someone like you or me to help us figure out, okay, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to strategize? How am I going to figure this out? Because we're so close to it. We're too close sometimes. We're too close, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned this earlier, just leaning on other people. I love the informational interviews you did, the mentors you reached out to, because you get so stuck in your own bubble and your own way that sometimes you can't see through the trees, like see beyond the forest, right?
Right. We not only do we get stuck, but we are our own worst enemies sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And we become blindsided. It's like, take the blinders off, see what's on the right, see what's on the left, because you never know what might be there. You never know.
That's so true. I mean, so we talked about a lot of really cool things today. If there was one thing, one piece of advice you would give my listeners, they're on the fence, they're kind of stuck and they don't know how to take that first step, what would that piece of advice be?
I think I touched on it a little bit earlier, but the first piece is to listen. The second piece is to think outside the box. The third piece is to trust yourself that you know more than you think you know. And I'll add one more quote. This is from my mom. The goal of living is to be able to absorb all of the pain of life and lose none of the joy. Going through any kind of a process like this is going to be challenging. Life is filled with obstacles. Learn to rise above them and trust that there is joy and keep moving forward. Keep putting one foot in front of the other, and find yourself being grateful for anything you can. Stay positive. I'm a big believer in vision boards and all those things. I do them all myself. I journal. I've been journaling every day for 40 years. But still, and that's a great way also to get started, is to journal. And don't think it has to be perfect prose. Mine is completely extemporaneous. Whatever comes to my mind, it's like a brain dump almost. And that's a wonderful way to kind of begin to process, because when you're doing that and write, either handwriting it or type it in my computer now, but that is a wonderful process for gaining clarity. You may not see it at first, but then go back a week, go back 2 weeks, go back a month, go back 6 months, and you might see dots being connected.
I love that suggestion. I would also suggest, mainly because I'm reading the book right now, Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg.
Yes.
He's a behavioral psychologist at Stanford. I love how he recommends just as soon as you get out of the bed in the morning and you put your feet on the ground, you say, today is going to be a great day.
Intention.
Yes.
Intention.
So I've been doing that. I love it.
Yes.
It makes me feel great.
Yes. Again, what are you telling yourself?
Yes.
Those intentional habits. This is going to be a great day. Rebecca and I are going to have a wonderful conversation because we're so aligned.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for this inspiring dialogue. You gave me so much food for thought that I'll certainly take away in my life as I continue to go down my journey and create the 3.0, 4.0, 5.0. But I really hope that everyone listening to this conversation really feels more confident that they can be themselves and follow their authentic path. I think the work you are doing is so incredibly important, helping people tune into their true purpose. If we could all live authentically and live with joy on a daily basis, what a wonderful dream that would be, to be in a world where everyone is living in joy.
That would be wonderful. It's certainly something we can aspire to, isn't it? Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me on, Rebecca. It's just a pleasure to have conversation with you.
If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And if you would like to learn more about the Empathy Collective, check out our website, theempathycollective.com. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.